Why does reaching out to an avoidant after no contact usually push them away? Most people break no contact the same way, with honesty, vulnerability, and good intentions, which is exactly what makes avoidants retreat even further. This happens because avoidants respond to reconnection differently than other attachment styles. What feels like connection to you registers as pressure to them. In this video, you'll understand how avoidants think about reconnection, what makes them receptive versus defensive, and the strategy that actually brings them closer. If you've been wondering when and how to reach out, or if you already tried and it went wrong, stay with me. The biggest mistake people make when trying to get an avoidant back after no contact is assuming the person who comes back needs to see change, growth, or emotional clarity. That assumption feels logical because in most relationship dynamics, showing progress and maturity helps rebuild trust. With avoidance, though, leading with personal transformation creates the opposite effect. When someone reaches out explaining how much they've learned, how they've worked on themselves, or how different things will be now, an avoidant hears a promise of more intensity, more emotional demands, and more vulnerability they'll eventually need to match. Their system reads growth talk as a preview of increased closeness, which is exactly what triggered their retreat in the first place. Getting an avoidant back starts with understanding what no contact actually did to their internal state. During the first days of silence, most avoidants experience relief. The pressure that built up from emotional conversations, relationship talks, or what felt like neediness finally lifts. Their nervous system, which felt constantly activated by the relationship's demands, gets the space it was craving. This phase feels like freedom to them. Reaching out during this window accomplishes nothing because they're still decompressing from what felt like too much closeness. Any contact during this period just reminds them why they needed distance in the first place. Something shifts after that initial relief fades, though. Avoidants don't consciously realize this is happening, but their attachment system starts recalibrating. The distance that felt necessary begins feeling like actual loss instead of protective space. Memories of the relationship stop being framed through the lens of too much and start being remembered as connection they valued. This recalibration doesn't happen because they suddenly miss the person. It happens because their attachment system, which is wired to maintain connection even while protecting against too much of it, starts registering the absence as a real threat rather than a controlled break. Most people misread the signs at this point and blow their chance at reconnection. They notice the avoidant watching their stories, liking old photos, or sending breadcrumb messages that say nothing specific, but signal some level of interest. The natural response is to reciprocate warmth, match their energy, or use this opening to have the conversation that never happened before. That response feels right because it mirrors how reconnection works with other attachment styles, but with avoidance, it triggers immediate withdrawal. The moment they sense someone is ready to engage emotionally again, their system registers threat and the wall goes back up. The strategy that actually works requires doing something that feels completely counterintuitive. When an avoidant starts showing signs of interest after no contact, the move isn't to meet them halfway or show you're open to reconnecting. The move is to acknowledge they're reaching out in a way that creates zero pressure for anything to develop from it. This means responding to breadcrumb contact with the same lightness they're offering. Nothing more, nothing less. If they watch your stories consistently, they're monitoring connection without committing to it. If they send a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" text, they're testing whether you're still in the same emotional state that felt overwhelming before. The response that keeps them leaning in is one that shows you're genuinely okay, not waiting for them to come back, and definitely not planning to turn their small gesture into a relationship conversation. Think about how this plays out in real interactions. An avoidant sends a message weeks into no contact asking something casual, maybe commenting on something you posted or mentioning a random memory. Most people interpret this as an opening and respond with warmth, perhaps adding something that hints at wanting to talk more or reconnect properly. That addition, even when small, is what kills the interaction. The avoidant was testing the waters to see if the emotional intensity has decreased, and any sign that it hasn't, that you're still invested, still hoping, still wanting more, confirms their decision to stay distant. The response that works is one that matches their casual energy completely, shows you're doing well, and ends without any hint of wanting to continue the conversation or build on it. This dynamic confuses people because it seems like playing games or being cold, but it's actually the only way to work with how avoidants process reconnection. Their system needs to feel that reaching out won't result in immediate emotional escalation. They need to test connection multiple times and find it safe before they can consider actually engaging again. When someone responds to their breadcrumbs with matching casualness, it does something important. It shows the emotional climate has changed. The person they pulled away from, who might have been anxious or pursuing or emotionally intense, now seems genuinely unaffected by their absence. That shift is what makes reconnection possible because it removes the threat their system was protecting against. The timing of when to reach out first, if at all, depends entirely on whether the avoidant has shown any signs of interest during no contact. If they haven't, no story views, no likes, no random messages, reaching out before they've naturally started leaning back in almost always fails. This is hard to accept because it means potentially waiting indefinitely or accepting that reconnection might not happen, but trying to force it before their system has recalibrated just reinforces why they left. Avoidants need to feel the pull back toward connection on their own terms before external contact has any chance of landing well. If someone reaches out while the avoidant is still in relief mode or hasn't started missing the connection, the message gets read as more of the same pressure they escaped. When an avoidant has shown consistent signs of interest, multiple story views over weeks, several small attempts at reaching out, or clear monitoring of your life, that's when starting contact yourself becomes possible, but only if done in a specific way. The message can't reference the relationship, the time apart, feelings, or any desire to reconnect meaningfully. It needs to be as casual and low stakes as their breadcrumbs were, something that gives them an easy out and requires nothing from them emotionally. Asking a simple question related to something you know they're interested in, sharing something funny that reminds you of an old inside joke with zero emotional weight, or commenting on something neutral. They post-it-all work because they create a small interaction window without any pressure attached. What happens next determines whether getting them back actually builds or dies immediately. If the avoidant responds to this casual contact, the next move isn't to increase intensity or frequency. It's to continue the same pattern. Light, sporadic, undemanding interactions that slowly rebuild comfort without triggering their defense system. Many people make the mistake of thinking one good conversation means they can now transition into more meaningful connection. They start texting more often, suggesting meeting up, or gradually increasing emotional content in their messages. Each of these escalations feels natural because the interaction has been positive, but to an avoidant, any increase in intensity or frequency signals that the dynamic is heading back toward what felt suffocating before. Getting an avoidant back happens in layers, not in one conversation or one interaction. Each casual exchange that goes well and stays light creates a small deposit of safety. Their system starts learning that interacting with you doesn't automatically lead to emotional demands or relationship pressure. The psychological principle at work here is called graduated exposure. Avoidants can handle small doses of connection when there's clear space around each interaction. What overwhelms them is sustained closeness without breaks or emotional intensity that escalates quickly. By keeping interactions brief, casual, and spaced out, you're working with their nervous system's capacity rather than against it. Each positive interaction that doesn't lead to pressure or demands expands their tolerance for connection slightly. Over time, this allows for longer conversations, more personal topics, and eventually the possibility of discussing the relationship itself, but only after their system has been retrained through consistent evidence that engaging won't trap them in something that feels like too much. One of the hardest parts of this strategy is managing your own attachment system while executing it. If you're anxious or even secure but still emotionally invested in the outcome, maintaining this level of casualness and patience feels nearly impossible. Every positive interaction triggers hope, which makes you want to move things forward. Every period of silence after a good conversation activates anxiety about losing momentum. These reactions are completely normal, but acting on them destroys the process of getting an avoidant back because it brings back the exact energy their system can't handle. This is why winning an avoidant back often requires working on your own emotional state at the same time, not to become perfect or completely healed, but to genuinely reach a point where you're okay with whatever happens and not depending on their response for your stability. A specific shift needs to happen internally for this strategy to work authentically. It's not about pretending to be unaffected while actually obsessing over every interaction. It's about genuinely building a life and emotional state where their presence is welcome but not necessary. Avoidants have extremely sensitive detection systems for neediness or hidden agendas. If you're performing casualness while secretly hoping every interaction leads to getting back together, they sense that mismatch, and it triggers withdrawal. The strategy only works when the lightness is real, when you've actually moved into a state where reconnection would be nice, but not essential to your well-being. This creates a paradox that many people struggle with. The more you need the avoidant to come back, the less likely it is to happen. But the moment you genuinely stop needing it, reconnection becomes possible. This isn't a game or a manipulation tactic. It's just how avoidant attachment responds to relational energy. They move toward people who aren't pulling on them and away from people who are, even when the pulling is gentle or well-intentioned. Getting to a place of genuine indifference about the outcome isn't about giving up or playing hard to get. It's about recognizing that your emotional stability can't depend on whether someone with avoidant patterns decides to engage again. The strategy for getting them back also has to account for what killed the connection originally. If the relationship ended because of anxious avoidant dynamics, where one person was pursuing and the other distancing, getting them back won't work unless that pattern has actually shifted. The avoidant needs to see through your behavior, not your words, that the dynamic has changed. This means not just avoiding anxious behaviors during reconnection attempts, but actually resolving whatever created the anxiety in the first place. Avoidants can sense when someone is forcing themselves to act casual versus actually being in a different emotional place. The former doesn't create safety because they know the anxiety is just suppressed, waiting to resurface once connection rebuilds. Some situations don't allow for getting them back, no matter how perfectly the strategy is executed. If the avoidant has completely moved on, started a new relationship, or made a firm decision that reconnection isn't something they want, no amount of strategic casualness changes that. The strategy works when an avoidant is in the recalibration phase, where their system is starting to register the loss of connection, but it can't create desire for reconnection that doesn't exist. This is why reading their level of interest during no contact matters so much. If there's genuinely nothing, no monitoring, no reaching out, no signs of curiosity about your life, the honest reality might be that they've closed that door. Trying to force it open with perfectly timed messages just becomes a more sophisticated form of the same pursuing that pushed them away initially. There's also the question of whether getting an avoidant back is worth the effort and emotional restraint it requires. Reconnecting with an avoidant doesn't fix their attachment patterns. Even if the strategy works and you successfully rebuild connection, the same dynamics that created distance before will resurface unless they're actively working on their attachment style. Many people invest enormous energy into getting an avoidant back, only to find themselves in the same cycle months later. Closeness, withdrawal, pursuit, distance, repeat. Getting them back is only worth pursuing if the avoidant has shown genuine awareness of their patterns and willingness to work on them, not just in words, but through actual therapy or sustained effort to change their responses in relationships. The most successful reconnections happen when both people have used the time apart to shift their own patterns. The avoidant has started recognizing how their distancing affects relationships and developed tools to stay present through discomfort. The other person has worked on their own attachment security and reached a place where they're choosing reconnection from desire rather than need. When both of these shifts have happened, the relationship that reforms has a different foundation than the one that ended. Without both pieces, getting them back just leads to the same breaking point eventually. Understanding all of this changes how you evaluate whether to even attempt getting an avoidant back. It's not just about whether you can execute the strategy correctly, but whether the relationship has potential to be different than it was before. If an avoidant ended things because they felt overwhelmed by normal relationship expectations, wanting consistent communication, emotional availability, or basic commitment, getting them back doesn't solve that incompatibility. The pattern will just repeat with the same outcome. Getting them back makes sense when the disconnect was about timing, external stressors, or dynamics that both people now understand and can address differently. It doesn't make sense when the fundamental issue is that what you need in a relationship triggers their attachment system's core fears. The decision to pursue getting them back also needs to account for what the process costs you emotionally. Maintaining the level of casualness and patience required while watching an avoidant slowly lean back in takes significant emotional resources. For some people, especially those with anxious attachment, this process is so activating that it damages their well-being regardless of whether it eventually works. There's no shame in deciding that getting an avoidant back isn't worth what it requires, that you'd rather invest your energy in connections that don't need this level of strategic restraint. Avoidants aren't bad people or broken, but their attachment style does create specific relational challenges that not everyone is equipped or willing to navigate. If you do choose to pursue getting them back, the final piece that makes it work is absolute consistency in your responses. Avoidants need predictability to feel safe. If your responses vary wildly, sometimes casual and breezy, other times emotionally heavy or pursuing, their system can't calibrate to you and defaults to withdrawal. Every interaction needs to reinforce the same message. Connection with you is safe, light, and doesn't come with hidden demands or expectations. This consistency over time is what eventually allows their nervous system to relax enough to consider genuine engagement again. There's an additional layer that many people overlook when trying to get an avoidant back, and it relates to how avoidants perceive change in others. Avoidants are deeply skeptical of sudden transformations or claims of personal growth because their attachment style developed partly as a response to inconsistent caregiving. They learned early that people's promises don't always match their actions, so they trust patterns over words. When someone reaches out after no contact claiming to be different now, the avoidant's default assumption is that this change is temporary or performative. They've likely heard similar promises before, either in this relationship or previous ones, and watched those promises dissolve once closeness returned. This is why showing change through consistent behavior over time matters infinitely more than talking about it. An avoidant needs to observe the shift happening naturally across multiple interactions before they can trust it's real. The concept of emotional permanence also plays a role in how avoidants process reconnection after no contact. For people with secure or anxious attachment, feelings tend to persist even during periods of separation. They continue missing someone, thinking about them, and wanting connection despite physical distance. Avoidants often experience something different. When they create distance, their feelings can diminish or become easier to suppress. Out of sight genuinely becomes out of mind to a degree that other attachment styles find hard to understand. This means that during no contact, while you might be constantly thinking about them and the relationship, they might have successfully compartmentalized those feelings and moved them to a back burner. Getting them back requires first reigniting awareness of what existed between you, and that only happens through the kind of light, repeated contact that doesn't trigger their defenses. Each casual interaction serves as a gentle reminder of the connection without demanding they immediately access all the feelings they've successfully suppressed. Another factor that determines success in getting an avoidant back is understanding their specific flavor of avoidance. Not all avoidants operate identically. Some are dismissive avoidants who genuinely prefer independence and find most relationship closeness uncomfortable. Others are fearful avoidants who want connection but simultaneously fear it, creating an internal push-pull that's different from the dismissive pattern. Dismissive avoidants might need even more space and casualness in reconnection because their comfort zone is genuinely more solitary. Fearful avoidants might show more inconsistency, leaning in and then panicking and pulling back repeatedly, which requires even more patience and stability from you. Recognizing which pattern you're dealing with helps calibrate expectations and strategy. A dismissive avoidant might take months to slowly warm up through sporadic casual contact, while a fearful avoidant might cycle through interest and withdrawal multiple times before stabilizing. Neither pattern is better or worse, but they do require slightly different levels of patience and different interpretations of their behaviors. The role of jealousy or competition in getting an avoidant back is also worth addressing because it's commonly misunderstood. Some advice suggests making an avoidant jealous by visibly moving on, dating others, or showing you're thriving without them. While it's true that avoidants respond to independence and seeing someone doing well, overt displays designed to create jealousy often backfire. Avoidants have sensitive pride and a strong need for autonomy. If they sense you're trying to manipulate their emotions through jealousy, it confirms their suspicion that emotional dynamics with you are complicated and potentially controlling. What works better is genuinely living well and letting that be visible naturally through your social media or mutual connections, rather than staging it for their benefit. The difference is subtle, but matters enormously to how an avoidant receives the information. Authentic well-being attracts them because it signals you're not emotionally dependent on them. Performed well-being designed to create jealousy repels them because it signals you're still focused on getting a reaction from them. Getting an avoidant back after no contact isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about understanding how their attachment system processes reconnection and working with it rather than against it. The strategy requires patience, emotional stability, and genuine acceptance that it might not work. When it does work, it's because you've created conditions where their system feels safe enough to move toward connection instead of away from it. That safety comes from proving through consistent behavior that the relationship won't become the overwhelming, suffocating dynamic their attachment style fears most. The process teaches you as much about your own attachment patterns as it does about theirs, and that growth remains valuable regardless of whether reconnection ultimately succeeds. If you're trying to reconnect with an avoidant after no contact, start by checking whether they've shown any genuine interest during the silence. Wait for those signs before reaching out. And when you do, keep everything light and pressure-free. Let me know in the comments what happened when you tried to reconnect. Did they respond well to casualness, or did something else work for you? If this helped you understand avoidant patterns better, hit that like button and subscribe for more content on attachment styles and relationship dynamics. Thanks for watching.